Grace to you all this morning and peace from God our Father and from our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Amen. It's not often that I have to begin the sermon with a disclaimer, but today I need to make two. The first is that those of you who have been around the church for a while will know that I do not choose the lessons for any particular Sunday. But they are chosen and have been chosen years and years ago by a committee, and these lessons are shared across many Christian denominations. Therefore, it was not I who chose that reading from Isaiah that talks about mounting up on wings like eagles. And I didn't have anything to do with the bulletin cover either, okay, just for the record.
Buy that.
The second disclaimer I would make to you is because I don't choose the lessons, I didn't choose the gospel reading to go with our visit from the Pleasantville Volunteer Fire Department. Although, in my mind, the two fit so perfectly and beautifully together. But we'll hear a little bit more about that. What difference do you make? What difference do you make in the great scheme of things? I read the passage from Isaiah and I was a little bit offended. Maybe you had that reaction too, where people are like stubble, like grasshoppers, like things of no consequence. And I thought, now hold on a second, we hear that enough. We feel that enough. We don't need to hear that coming out of Scripture as well. People are like stubble, like grasshoppers. Then I began to consider more the context and wonder about that question. What difference do you make? Israel had been through a difficult time. Everything about their life that they knew and could count on had been disrupted. Powerful empire had come in, wiped out the temple, taken away anybody of leadership or skill or capability, and forced exile them into the land of Babylon. And at the moment that that happened, as cultures both within Israel and outside of Israel now, not of their own choosing, reeled from this drastic change in the world around them, they began to wonder, as many people do in times of crisis, where is God? What is God up to? In a time like this, they said to themselves, why doesn't God come to help us? Of all times, they said to themselves, as many, many generations have said since then, this is the time when God should go show God's power, when God should do something that will really vindicate God's people. And they waited and they waited and it didn't happen. What they saw in their limited vision, as is most of our vision, was the immediate consequence of their own troubles and struggles. And by implication, the absence of a God who would come and redeem them. Roughly 50 years later, we have this reading from Isaiah. And at the time that Isaiah writes, Israel's fortunes have changed. That superpower that came in and destroyed their way of life and the most important things in their society had itself been overcome by another superpower. So that the once powerful empire of Babylon was no more and was itself struggling with the same kinds of questions as the Israelites were 50 years before. And what Isaiah affirms there in that change of fortune is that if you look to your current rulers, he says, or if you look to the rulers of the world, it is they who are like stubble. Scarcely does their root descend into the ground, then they are wiped out. Which should give us an idea about our valuation of the particular political situation in which we find ourselves at any time. Don't get too worked up about it, is what Isaiah seems to say. People, rulers, are not constant, but God is. is Isaiah's affirmation. And Isaiah talks about the power of God and how wonderful God is in creating the heavens and stretching them out and in all that God has done for creation. And Isaiah says what we need to do is to refocus. Rather than looking only at our current troubles or struggles, what's going on right now on this day, we need to take the broader view. And God inevitably, Isaiah affirms, shows up. But where? Where? That's the beauty for me of this passage from Isaiah. Where does God show up? In appointing a new ruler? In changing the world situation? That's not what Isaiah says. Instead, what it seems that Isaiah says, where we need to look for God, comes in God's working through individuals who, because of God's presence in your life, matter. The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth, writes Isaiah. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. But then Isaiah affirms, those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. In the midst of the struggles and challenges, of the changes that come simply as a consequence of being alive, Isaiah says that God is constant, and if we wait for God, if we're patient, if our eyes are open, we will find God present, sustaining the weak and the weary, giving us the strength that we need. So it seems that this cosmic God, this God of creation, of all the stars, which God knows by name, has a particular interest in each one of us. That this awesome God who created everything that is, takes the time in love to focus on the individuality of us as God's creation. And that's where the gospel reading from Mark comes in. What does Jesus do? Jesus, who is God in the flesh, begins to intervene in individual people's lives. Now, I have to confess to you that this passage from Mark was always a little bit awkward, because maybe you felt it too. Jesus goes into the house and finds that Peter's mother-in-law is ill. He's told about this, and immediately he makes her well. And as soon as she is well, she begins to serve them. And you think, okay, so he didn't know where the refrigerator was, so he made Peter's mother-in-law well so she could go take care of them. He only made her well so that she could serve them. I always felt a little uncomfortable about that until I thought about it some more and read a little bit more about it. And I realized that what I was doing was importing my understanding into a different time. And let's broaden the picture out a little bit, as Mark does in his gospel. Jesus doesn't go in and wheel Peter's mother-in-law and then sit around all day watching the Super Bowl, telling her to bring him another beer. Rather, he continues his ministry out in the world, healing people, casting out demons, freeing people from their limitations, helping them to live the fullness of life that God intended for them. And sisters and brothers, I think that for Peter's mother-in-law, that was her ability, at least in part, to serve those who had come into her house. Hospitality was such an important value of the society of that time. And you can imagine that for Peter's mother-in-law to be laying there on a bed sick while she had guests in her house was driving her nuts. The story told in my own family is that it didn't matter how old my German grandmother got, every Friday she scrubbed the kitchen floor. She would find a way to do it even if she had to go over to a chair to get herself upright again, because that's what gave her joy and a sense of meaning and purpose. My poppy didn't tell her it's the scrub the floor day. It's what she did because it helped to give organization to her life. No matter what her physical condition. And you know, or at least I do, that if Friday came, and Granny was too sick to get out of bed, one of the first things she thought about was that she couldn't scrub the floor that day. That's what she did. And nobody forced her to do it. It was one of the ways that she found meaning and purpose in her life. And so Jesus goes on to heal many people and free them from their limitations. And when they want to go out and start doing PR for Jesus, he says, no, don't do that. Just go back to living the life that God has blessed you with. Go back to doing what you were created to do. Jesus doesn't heal all these people and raise up Peter's mother-in-law so that he can have a bunch of people waiting on him. He heals them and raises them up so they can go back to life as usual, which is to be an opportunity for God to do something good in the community, to make their contribution. Each person doing what they can for the good of all, in ways both small and great. For Peter's mother-in-law to get up and serve, because it's what she wanted to do, we might imagine. In community. Yesterday, and this is where that connection comes in that I mentioned to you earlier. Yesterday I had the privilege to attend a seminar, a firefighting seminar about fighting fires in difficult situations. And the presenters were talking about how, especially in those situations, they use the phrase, you have to be an active listener. Is that what they said? Active listener? Or what we would say in the church, you have to bring mindfulness into what you do. Because if you rush in too quickly, you're going to get yourself in a situation that you might not get out of. And the number one goal, I don't know if you guys know this, I mean, I know you guys know this, the number one goal in firefighting is that everybody gets to go home at the end of the day. Right? I love that. I love that. One of the presenters said, no matter what you do, the fire will go out. So the goal is for everyone to go home at the end of the day. And one of the ways that that can happen is that you bring mindfulness or active listening into what you do so that you're assessing the situation as you go in and you don't take unnecessary risks. And the instructors told us that it's a tendency sometimes on the part of the younger firefighters to be like, we're going to go in there, we're going to put this fire out, and not step back long enough to assess the situation, which is why there needs to be a team of firefighters, some of them who have more wisdom and more self-control to help balance out that firefighting effort, which can be pretty tricky at times. And I thought that was really good advice so that each person can use their particular gifts. And if you've ever been in a situation, and I've been to a number of fires, and as the one on the outside, it's like, oh my gosh, this is a disaster. But to the trained firefighters, it's something that they can handle. And do they want to put the fire out? Absolutely. Do they give all of their strength and wisdom to that effort? Absolutely. But in ways that will help everybody to go home at the end of the day. Using their particular gifts for the good of the community or that particular homeowner or that particular victim. And it's a wonderful witness to me of exactly what Jesus is talking about here, to empower individuals to carry out their lives in a way that makes a difference in the community. That seems to me to be what Jesus is doing in Mark's gospel. And our firefighters have become an example of that, but each one of us does that in our own particular way. But again, always in the presence of community, together, for the sake of one another, learning from one another as a team, so we gain strength from one another. And God works in that way through us for the sake of us and others out there. Together. Now I have a little demonstration for you. Would you mind? This is a part of the bell piece that will be played later in the service. I just want you to listen carefully. Sounded good. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Ego. Wasn't that beautiful?
Yes.
Yeah, right? That's really good blanks. Nobody's singing along. Now, just try and tuck that in the back of your head, okay? Because later on the bells are going to do that piece with the entire choir. Now, Paul just playing alone didn't sound like much. But again, listen later on. See how all this comes together. It will become for you, I think, a demonstration of what it means to work together in community. We can all make our own music in isolation. It'll be okay, but it won't be what it's intended to be. But God empowers us together to make a difference. God empowers us working with one another, gaining strength from one another to make a difference. So that as we each give of our gifts, our talents, our energy, our strength, our prayers, our heart, our wisdom, the difference is greater than any one individual. I think that's why Jesus healed people. So they can go back and be active members of their community, contributing in the way that God enabled them. I found this great quote that I want to share with you as I wrap up the sermon. Because one of the struggles was for Isaiah and for people at Jesus' time and for people of our time, here we have this majestic God, and here we have our own situation, and where's the bridge between those two? And Isaiah's people at the time of the destruction said there is no bridge. And Isaiah then was able to affirm, yes, there is, in God strengthening the weak and helping those who are faint. Pastor David Lose writes this: "The mighty God whose praise Isaiah sings is indeed at work to sustain the cosmos." Right? So God is more than just me and us. God is the creator of the cosmos. And I don't think we should ever forget that, because that reminds us of the power and the strength of God. But again, he says, God is at work to sustain the cosmos, strengthen the weak, and restore those who have fallen. And the most frequent way God does this is by working through all of those around us. Right? That's where we see it most powerfully. So where do we look to trace the actions of God, who, as Isaiah says, sits alone on the circle of the earth and stretches out the heavens like a curtain? By looking to the everyday acts of care, service, and sacrifice that we see all around us. This is where I said it's like this amazing thing that our firefighters would be here, because they exemplify that so well. As do you, because I know you. You know, each thing that you do, right? Each thing that each one of you does in your own particular way helps promote this everyday act of care, service, and sacrifice. And I want you to, maybe we should just step back for a minute and take a moment to appreciate that. And to thank God for that ability. To look not at the destruction or the things that don't go well, but to look at the difference that we're making in people's lives. And each of you does that. Each one of you does that in some particular way. Whether, by directing the bell choir or treating high school students who are not always the wisest, right? But who need your love and care and compassion, or by giving an example of what it means to be a faithfully married couple for years and years and years, accompanying one another through the ups and downs of life, or you name it. I could actually go through the entire congregation this morning and point out something about each and every one of you that would be evidence of God's presence coming into the world for the sake of the world. But we don't have time for that, so I'm going to ask you to do that on your own. To think about the way that God works and in and through you to make this world a better place. And if you can't do that, I have time this week. You're going to come see me, and we're going to figure it out together, okay? Because that's the way God works, and that's the beauty and the miracle. So I'm serious. If you can't do that, we need to talk. Because there are powerful ways that God is working through you. And I think you may not be seeing it, but we can discover that together. So again, how do we see God? By looking at the everyday acts of care, service, and sacrifice we see all around us. Which means that our seemingly ordinary lives can become at any given moment, and often do, the place for the activity of the Holy One of Israel, as God continues to love and bless the world. And then he ends with these two words, which are such good, they're really good Lutheran words, but they're really good human words and Christian words. He says, as God continues to bless the world through us, each of us individually and all of us collectively and together. God continues to love and bless the world. This morning at our annual meeting, we're going to talk about discipleship. Ways that we can continue to make a contribution, and maybe some new ways that we can make a contribution to allow God to bless and love the world through us. But the reality is that God is already doing that through you. The affirmation from God to each and every one of you this morning is that indeed, for God's sake, you make a difference. Amen.